What's up, guys? I'm Hub Smash, and today I wanted to talk with you a little bit about ELO Hell. Does it exist? Where did the idea come from? Why is it so prevalent? And with Overwatch Season 2 of Competitive a few weeks underway, I thought it would be a good time to talk about this, give my opinion on the subject, and get the ball rolling on the discussion. ELO Hell is a concept that gained popularity from League of Legends community regarding Riot's ranking system. It was definitely a concept or thought of before that, but the League of Legends community is really what popularized it, and it's the idea that you deserve to be in a higher tier or rating, but that you're held back by your teammates. Another meaning that people think of when they think of ELO Hell is that players at different tiers provide different game experiences for you, perhaps more toxicity, ruining many of the games you play, or perhaps they're not working with the team in the way that they should be working with the team to play a proper game. So in that idea, ELO Hell doesn't necessarily mean lower tiers. It could mean any tier, really, that gives a predominantly negative experience. And so I wanted to talk today about whether or not ELO Hell exists as it relates to Overwatch, and specifically I'm talking about the idea of ELO Hell that has people thinking that they would be Diamond or they would be Master if only their teammates just learned how to play. Before I get too into it, let's talk about why ELO Hell as a concept even exists. Why is it that people think that the majority of all their games, they're unlucky and they have bad teammates losing the matches for them? First, we need to take a look at something called the dunning-kruger effect. And I'll put a link into the description for the Wikipedia page for this. So again, it's called the dunning-kruger effect. And before I get into this, I'm going to use words like incompetent, and I want to be clear that by using this word, I mean that a person is performing below average at a thing. I don't mean that they're incompetent in general. I'm not using it as an insult. I'm just saying that they're, doing something a little bit below average or below average. So to quickly summarize the dunning-kruger concept as best I can, the effect is essentially that people perceive themselves to be better at a given thing than they actually are. It manifests itself in a few different ways, and here are the bullet points. People who are incompetent at a given thing will tend to fail to recognize their own lack of skill, fail to recognize the extent of their inadequacy, fail to accurately gauge skill in others, and recognize and acknowledge their own lack of skill only after they're exposed to training for that skill. An analogy that Dunning has said is that an incompetent person can't know they're incompetent because the skills they require to produce the right outcomes are the same skills that they need to recognize what the right outcome is. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's the general idea. So, for example, in Overwatch terms, Will is rank 2250. This puts him somewhere in and around the 25th percentile, give or take maybe 5. That means, according to the system, 70 to 80% players are better than Mr. Smith. One of the things that the dunning-kruger effect does is make it so that Will thinks he's better than he is. So Will thinks he deserves to be ranked, let's say, 2500 to 2750. When he's playing with other 2250 ranked players, he feels like they're underperforming. He's overestimating his own ability and unable to effectively judge the skills of his teammates and the enemies. This makes it easy for him to blame his losses on his team. And that's one of the reasons that people constantly are blaming their team, and they're seeing all these things that their team are doing, and they're saying, why are these guys so bad? This is part of it. The second reason I believe ELO Hell exists is something called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is pretty straightforward. Essentially, it's the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypothesis, while giving disproportionately less consideration to alternative possibilities. What this means is you'll notice your levers on your team more than you'll notice levers on the other team, or any other evidence that points to the idea that losses aren't your fault. Cognitive bias is something that happens subconsciously in most situations. It's not something that people choose to ignore opposing evidence entirely. It's just that they place more weight on evidence that favors their belief. Basically, their mind kind of conveniently just forgets about the evidence that opposes their opinion, or what they already believe to be true. It causes their perspective to be skewed further as they continue to receive evidence that they're correct. These two factors together can very clearly create a scenario where somebody not only thinks that they're better than they are, but they also notice all the evidence that promotes that idea more than the evidence that doesn't. But does ELO Hell actually exist in a way where you can't climb out of a certain rating because of the other players that are there? There isn't a short answer to this. There are two ways of thinking about the ELO Hell concept, and one of the ways we've talked about this already. but ones that you can't choose, you can't raise your rank because the random teammates are holding you back, and the others that the specific tiers of rating can be hellish due to toxicity. It's important to recognize, though, that the game is definitely different at different levels. There are different strategies and behaviors that are more prevalent. There might be more or less toxicity in certain tiers of play as well. It could be argued that the 2,500 to 34.99 or the platinum and diamond areas are the most toxic tiers, and in my experience, this might even be accurate. This group of players, like a group of players that I'm a part of, I'm a diamond player, are good enough to start to get confident in their abilities. We're pretty solid mechanically, and we generally take the game fairly seriously, and we can be the least forgiving of mistakes because in a game like Overwatch, whiffing your graviton surge can mean that you lose the match or a round. We tend to focus on winning and are pretty decent at winning, so when it appears like somebody else is interfering with that, things can get toxic and bad pretty quickly. And I don't like to use the word toxic so much because I feel like it's overused, but in the way I just mean, toxic behavior is behavior that is detrimental to the team winning, basically, is how I'm using it in this video. The Zarya that missed her ultimate might be harassed quite a lot. And now that can happen at any tier. So this is just an example of tiers I've played at the most, and it's a generalization. So they can happen at any level of play. I'm just trying to make a point that the idea that the game is different at different tiers, and toxicity levels at different tiers can be different. You could even say that it's hell playing at the gold tier, for example. But is that the reason that you can't win? Absolutely not. The easiest way to prove it through mathematical concepts is by explaining that there's only one consistent variable in every match, and you might have guessed, but that variable that's consistent in every single match is you. You're the only factor that's in every single match you play. This means that the enemy team's more likely than you to experience toxicity, levers, or somebody that's just horribly bad and they don't deserve to be where they are. Basically, because your team consists of 5 random people and yourself, and the other team consists of 6 random people, over many games, you'll have more people, or you'll have people leave your team less than people leave the enemy team, for example. Leaving is the most extreme thing that somebody can do to screw up your team, right? To screw up your chances of winning. Somebody leaving, making it 5v6, is the worst thing that could happen. So I'm using that as an example. Unless, of course, you're the reason for them leaving due to toxicity. So if you're constantly harassing people, causing them to leave your team, it could cause you to have an increased lever amount, right? So logically, this makes sense. There are 5 opportunities for your team to have a bad or a toxic player or a lever, and there are 6 opportunities for the enemy team. So mathematically, over time, you should see more levers, more crappy behavior on the enemy team. So I can already hear the people saying, that's all well and good, but I'm just unlucky. So-and-so is this rank because he got lucky, and I just want to say that luck can and absolutely does play a factor over a smaller number of games, but the more games you play, the less luck will play a role, and we can apply a thought exercise to kind of explain this. So if we take a coin and flip it over and over and over, right, we're going to get heads or tails on each flip. The odds of getting heads or tails in an individual flip's 50%, but what are the odds of getting heads 10 times in a row? Well, for argument's sake, I'll just tell you, the odds are 1 in 1,024 that someone would flip a coin and get 10 heads in a row. In other words, there's a 0.09% chance that this would happen to an individual who flipped a coin 10 times. The more times we're flipping the coin, the more likely it is that we'll approach the baseline of 50% heads and 50% tails. Once we hit 1,000 flips, even if we started with 10 heads, we're probably closer to maybe 450 to 550 heads at this point. And so the same principle applies to Overwatch matches. Sure, you could have a string of luck that causes you to win a bunch of games or lose a bunch in a row, but once you start to throw more and more games at the statistics, it's going to even itself out. And we'll go back to the coin analogy for a second. What are the odds that you'd flip a coin and get heads 100 times in a row? Well, I can't even say the number, so I'm just going to put it on the screen. So what are the odds that you'll be matched up with bad players every game? Well, I don't know exactly, but if we follow the principles that we outlined with the coin flip, we can see that the more games we play, the less likely it becomes that we'll be matched up with bad players. The bigger the sample size, the closer to the expected value we'll get, because intuitively we can know that our team is less likely to have a bad random player than the enemy's team, and we can intuitively know that as we play more games, it's going to even out that spread. So in summary, the idea of ELO Hell definitely exists to a degree. There are different types of players we're going to see at different levels of play, different behaviors, either positive or negative, that we can say contribute to an overall feeling of being in a hellish tier. Some tiers might be more toxic than others, and things like that. However, even though we admit that that's the case, we need to recognize as a community that we can still climb. Focus on yourself, focus on what you did wrong and what you can do better. Despite how well you did in a given game, I can almost guarantee you made a mistake somewhere. Focus on bettering yourself, and you're sure to climb. I'd love to hear what you guys think on this topic. I know it's a controversial one, but let me know what you think in the comments. I want to hear it. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it very much. If you like the video, click that like button. It really helps with the channel. And if you want to see more stuff on Overwatch, consider subscribing. Thanks so much, guys, and take care.